In the highlands of ancient Mesoamerica, there was a temple that echoed not with hymns, but with screams. Nestled deep within the jungles of present-day Mexico, the Temple of Tlaloc stood as both a sanctuary and a slaughterhouse. Here, beneath intricately carved stone gods and skyward staircases, children were laid on altars, trembling, weeping, and fully conscious, as priests cut out their beating hearts. Why? To beg the gods for rain. This was no fringe ritual. This was state-sponsored sacrifice. Families offered their own sons and daughters, willingly, believing that the more tears the children shed, the more favor they'd receive from Tlaloc, the merciless rain god. And when drought parched the fields or disease swept the villages, the killings only intensified. But who were these children? How did an entire civilization justify such horror? And what did the Spanish conquistadors find when they finally entered the sacred temple's blood-soaked corridors? This isn't just a story of ritual and religion. It's a descent into a forgotten theology where innocence was the price of survival, and divine love demanded the ultimate betrayal. Welcome to the Sacred Slaughterhouse of the Aztecs. Let's begin. Long before the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, the Aztec Empire was one of the most advanced civilizations in the world, mathematically brilliant, astronomically precise, and spiritually obsessed. At the center of their belief system was a divine force both nurturing and terrifying, Tlaloc, the god of rain. But Tlaloc was no gentle bringer of life. He was a god of extremes, capable of quenching fields with rain or drowning entire cities in floods. And when he withheld his blessings, the land cracked, crops withered, and famine stalked the valleys like a silent predator. So the Aztecs devised a solution: sacrifice. Not of animals, not of criminals, but of the purest beings in their society, young children. According to ancient codices and archaeological evidence, the Aztecs believed that children's tears were sacred, that the more they cried before death, the more pleased Tlaloc would be. Their suffering was a form of divine currency. Their pain was seen as a prayer. These weren't secretive rites performed in shadows. They were public ceremonies, celebrated events where entire communities gathered to watch. High atop temples like the Great Shrine at Tenochtitlan or the sacred mountain shrine of Mount Tlaloc, priests conducted rituals with solemn reverence. The children, often between the ages of 5 and 7, were dressed in ceremonial robes, adorned with jade beads and feathers, and sometimes painted blue, the sacred color of Tlaloc. Before the ceremony, they were paraded through the streets, urged to cry. If they didn't weep, their caretakers, often their own families, would gently encourage them, even inflict pain, believing that tears were essential for the ritual to succeed. But this wasn't viewed as cruelty. To the Aztecs, it was duty. It was love twisted by desperation. If the rains didn't come, if the crops failed, everyone would starve. And so, the children became the most honored offerings, tiny messengers sent to plead with a god who listened only to the sobs of the innocent. As disturbing as it sounds, this wasn't some isolated cult practice. These sacrifices were institutionalized, ingrained into the very fabric of Aztec society. Kings, priests, farmers, and warriors all participated. Some families even offered their own children voluntarily, believing it to be a blessing, a ticket to divine favor in the afterlife. Archaeologists have since uncovered chilling proof: mass graves of children at temple sites, their tiny skeletons showing signs of ritual execution. Many had no visible wounds on the bones, suggesting death by soft tissue injury, likely having their hearts cut out or throats slit. Others were buried with miniature ceremonial objects, as if prepared for a sacred journey. What kind of society raises its children only to offer them up? The answer lies deeper, in the psychological and spiritual world of the Aztecs. In a worldview where gods walked among men, and the line between faith and fear was razor thin. This was only the beginning. The tears had to keep flowing. And the children, they kept coming. Perched nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, shrouded in mist and chilling wind, lies Mount Tlaloc, a sacred peak once believed to be the very dwelling place of the rain god himself. To modern eyes, it's just a high-altitude ruin, overgrown and desolate. But in the time of the Aztecs, this mountain was a portal between worlds, a bridge connecting earth, sky, and the divine forces that ruled both. Each year, As the dry season dragged on and the land cracked beneath a merciless sun, an elite pilgrimage would ascend the treacherous slopes of Mount Tlaloc. This wasn't a casual journey. It was a spiritually charged, government-sponsored event. High priests, nobles, warriors, and specially chosen children would climb the mountain to perform one of the most holy and horrifying rituals in the Aztec calendar. It was called the Atlacawalo, the stopping of the waters. But in truth, it was a desperate plea to release the rain. Historical records and later accounts from Spanish chroniclers describe the procession in chilling detail. Children, some as young as 4, were brought to the summit, dressed in the finest clothes their families could afford. They were pampered like royalty in the days before the ceremony, given toys, food, and affection. But they knew what awaited. Once atop the mountain, in a sacred stone complex known as Tlaloc, the ritual began. Priests invoked the god with chants, dances, and offerings. Fires burned in ceremonial pits. Clouds rolled in, as if summoned by belief itself. And then, before the gathered crowd, the children were sacrificed, sometimes through drowning, other times through more violent means. The belief was unwavering. The suffering of the innocent brought divine mercy. And here, at the literal heights of Aztec faith, the screams of children echoed through the thin mountain air. But what made Mount Tlaloc even more haunting was what archaeologists found centuries later. In the mid-20th century, explorers uncovered the remains of the ceremonial complex, a massive rectangular structure aligned perfectly with astronomical events, including the spring equinox. Evidence of ritual fires, offerings, and even remains of human bones were found, confirming that this wasn't myth. This was history carved into the mountain itself. More disturbingly, several mass child burials have been found near the region. In one case, at least 42 child skeletons were discovered buried together, many showing no signs of trauma to the bones. The implication? Soft tissue death, likely drowning or suffocation. Some were bound. Others had tiny jade beads in their mouths, symbolizing sacred speech or breath, perhaps a final message to the gods. Even the weather seemed to conspire with belief. Indigenous farmers claimed that after each ritual, the rains would return, as if the mountain had been appeased. Whether it was coincidence, climate, or collective delusion, the people believed. And belief, especially mass belief, can justify anything. But the tragedy didn't stop at Mount Tlaloc. Across the empire, from lakeside cities to highland shrines, temples rose in Tlaloc's name, each with its own version of the child's sacrifice ritual. And in the capital itself, beneath the soaring twin temples of Tenochtitlan, the rituals reached their most elaborate and darkest form. Because in the empire's heart, the god of rain was not alone. He had a wife, and her thirst was just as insatiable. If Tlaloc ruled the skies, Calcayutlacu reigned below, goddess of rivers, lakes, and childbirth. Her name meant she of the jade skirt, a symbol of flowing water. But the rivers she ruled were not always pure. To the Aztecs, Calcayutlacu was gentle and nurturing, but also terrifying. Her waters could give life, or drown it. And her fury, they believed, could flood the world itself. According to myth, she once did exactly that, ending an entire age of humanity with a deluge of divine rage. So when the people prayed to Tlaloc for rain, they also had to appease his wife. And her preferred offering? Newborns. While Tlaloc's sacrifices took place in the open air, often atop mountains, Calcayutlacu's rituals were private, shadowy, and far more intimate. In the great temples of Tenochtitlan, deep within dark chambers, midwives and priestesses conducted ceremonies in her honor, especially during times of drought or plagues affecting children. Historical records suggest that infants were immersed in sacred springs, wells, or temple basins. If the baby cried, it was considered a good omen, a sign that the goddess had heard. But if the infant was too quiet, the ritual continued until tears came, or until the water ran still. Some were buried alive in mud pits, symbolizing the goddess's domain. Others were laid into canoes, set adrift across sacred lakes, never to return. There are even tales of children placed in ornate reed baskets, their tiny bodies weighted with obsidian stones, and dropped into the deep. One particularly eerie account speaks of a lake near the temple, fed by underground canals. Infants were gently placed upon floating rafts and pushed out into the center. But those rafts never came back. Locals claimed they were taken by Tlaloc herself. And what's most haunting? In 2007, archaeologists excavating the Templo Mayor, the great temple at the heart of ancient Tenochtitlan, unearthed a cache of baby skeletons, their tiny bones neatly arranged, many with jade beads or seashells clutched in their fingers. These weren't buried randomly. They were part of a deliberate, sacred offering. The infants had been placed beneath the temple steps, literally forming the foundation of the structure dedicated to Tlaloc and his watery consort. It was as if the Aztecs believed their gods needed the dead to hold up the divine. But why did this obsession with infant sacrifice persist for centuries? The answer may lie in the Aztec worldview itself. They believed the universe was fragile, constantly on the brink of collapse. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the sun, the moon, and the earth. Now, it was humanity's duty to repay that cosmic debt with blood, and no blood was more potent, more sacred, than that of the pure. Children, uncorrupted by sin, were the most valuable currency of divine balance. It wasn't madness. It was math. Life for life. Rain for tears. Water for blood. But as the empire expanded, the scale of sacrifice grew. Festivals that once took place quietly in caves and streams were now state-sponsored spectacles. The rulers demanded results. And the gods, it seemed, demanded more. So they turned to one last place, where the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, the sacred springs. And there, they didn't just sacrifice children. They drowned entire villages. As the Aztec Empire reached its zenith, its thirst for power, for rain, for divine favor, became insatiable. And so did its gods. One location became infamous, Pantetlan, the place where everything sinks. A vast, misty whirlpool within Lake Texcoco, believed to be a direct portal to the underworld. Aztec priests claimed it was where Tlaloc himself drank the souls of the sacrificed. It began with children. During the Tlalocan festival each year, entire processions of toddlers, many purchased, others forcibly taken, were marched to the lake's edge. Clothed in bright blue cloaks and feathered headdresses, they were adorned as if being sent to royalty. But these were not ceremonial guests. They were gifts to the abyss. Eyewitness accounts from early Spanish friars describe how the children were held by the ankles, gently lowered into the water until they stopped moving. Their cries were drowned out by the chants of priests, drums, and the screams of parents begging for mercy. Then came the escalation. In years of severe drought, when the crops shriveled and the aqueducts ran dry, the emperor and his priests demanded more. Not just children, entire families. Records suggest that certain communities, particularly those living near sacred springs, were condemned as tainted or chosen. Under the cover of night, warriors raided villages, dragging men, women, and infants to the shores of Pantetlan. They were lined up, bound together by ropes of human hair, and marched into the water. Witnesses say no one resisted, not because they accepted their fate, but because they'd been drugged. Priests used herbs to dull the senses, ensuring calm compliance for the ritual. Once in the water, the bound villagers were pulled under by temple divers, their bodies left to float as offerings. The sight of dozens of lifeless forms drifting across the lake was seen not as horror, but as hope. And sometimes it worked. Rain would fall the very next day. The priests declared it proof that the gods were listening. That blood and bone had bought the storm. And so the cycle continued. But it wasn't just Lake Texcoco. Similar drownings were reported in sacred cenotes near present-day Yucatan. In one such cenote, Cenote Sagrado, over 120 sets of human remains have been discovered, many of them belonging to young girls and infants, adorned with gold jewelry and jade teeth. Their bones still whisper the story of a civilization desperate to bargain with the heavens. These weren't murders, according to Aztec logic. They were negotiations. And the price? Unthinkable. By the end of the empire, it's estimated that over 20,000 children had been sacrificed, many by drowning, over the course of just a few generations. An entire lineage lost beneath the lakes, rivers, and springs of a land forever haunted by its own gods. But as the Spanish arrived, Carrying crosses and cannons, they brought not just destruction, but something far more devastating to the Aztec worldview: rain. After a year of brutal drought and mass sacrifices, the rains returned. But they hadn't made a single offering. To the Aztecs, this was cosmic betrayal. Proof that their gods might not have needed the blood after all. That perhaps the sacrifices, the drownings, the centuries of tears had been for nothing. Today, tourists walk the sidewalks of Mexico City, unaware that beneath their feet lies the lake that once drank children's screams. Modern streets cover the bones of a god-haunted empire, and the blood-soaked springs have been paved over with concrete, highways, and glass towers. But the echoes remain. Construction workers in the city's historic core still uncover skeletons, tiny femurs, baby skulls with obsidian beads placed in their mouths, bundles of infant bones wrapped in ceremonial cloth, perfectly preserved in ancient clay pots. Each one is a whisper from a forgotten faith, a relic of desperation disguised as devotion. In 2015, beneath the Templo Mayor, archaeologists unearthed a mass grave of 42 children. All were between the ages of 3 and 7. Their bodies were arranged in a circle, hands clasped together. They weren't buried. They were offered. Even more chilling, researchers found blue pigment under their fingernails, traces of the sacred dye used in Tlaloc rituals. It was as if, even in death, the children were meant to look pleasing to the rain god, smiling still. But here's the question that haunts modern scholars. Did the Aztecs believe in this cruelty? Or did they fear not believing enough? Because the moment their faith faltered, when rain came without ritual, when drought persisted despite it, the entire system began to crack. And perhaps that's what frightened the priests most. Not the Spanish invaders, not the bleeding sun eclipsed by Christian crosses, but the realization that the gods might not have been listening at all. In secret texts, one Spanish friar wrote of an elder Aztec priest who, as he was burned at the stake, whispered, "We fed the gods our children because we did not know what else to feed." It wasn't faith. It was fear. Fear of emptiness. Fear that life was random. Fear that the rains came not through sacrifice, but through chance. And that terror birthed one of the most horrifying religious systems in history. So the next time you hear thunder rolling across the Valley of Mexico, ask yourself, is it just the rain? Or is it the sound of thousands of drowned children, still screaming into the storm, waiting for their God to answer? If this story chilled you to the core, imagine what else lies buried in the world's forgotten corners. Subscribe for more haunting tales of rituals, secrets, and civilizations gone mad in the name of gods. Because sometimes history doesn't whisper, it howls.